Hey, and welcome back to How to Start, Grow and Monetize Your Podcast with me, James Burt, and my podcast pal over there, Alex Chisnell. Between the two of us, we've launched about 400 successful podcasts for clients around the world. And we are also the creators of a fantastic free community about podcasting called Pod School.
We are.
So we love talking about podcasts and all things podcast related. Sometimes we like to talk about the big, exciting, sexy stuff like the marketing and the trailers and how to get your ideal guest and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes on the podcast we talk about the less sexy stuff, but it is still vital. Like today's episode, we're going to talk to you about RSS feeds. But you need to know this if you want to have a successful podcast, because your favourite podcast that you listen to, whether it be via Apple or Spotify or Amazon Music, it's not actually hosted by that platform. There's a third party. And if you don't set it up in the right way, people will not find out about your podcast. So, podcast platforms. You hyped to talk about a platform? You love a platform, didn't you?
I think you must have rattled through about 4 different accents.
Sorry, I got overexcited. We could use that for trailers. I'm still going to carry on anyway. So what actually is an RSS feed and what is a platform and why do people need it? Mr. Chisnell.
I think it's very much to get people's heads around this. Your podcast content needs to live somewhere.
Yes.
Very much like if you have a business or a personal brand and you have a website, it needs to live somewhere. So very similar to that, your hosting platform is where your podcast lives.
Yes.
And depending on if you are doing audio and video podcasting, and we would recommend in the current age to be doing video podcasting as well for most people out there, you would set up one for your audio and one for video on YouTube. Things become a little bit blurred now because Spotify now also host video on their hosting platform. But essentially, as you say, there is a middleman in this, and the middleman is the hosting platform, and then you have the distribution channels. And what most people, I think, are thinking of as a hosting platform is actually the distribution channel. So
Yes.
Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Amazon Music, all these guys are just distribution channels. They're another way that people can consume your content. Tell me about the RSS feed. Where does that fit into this?
Yeah, so that's a really good analogy. Like, it is the middleman. So, for example, if you want to put a video onto YouTube, you go into the back end of YouTube, you upload your video to YouTube, and it's in YouTube, and it goes on YouTube. Very simple.
Simple.
Podcasting is slightly different to that. So, whether you consume your podcast, and it matters very little for the end consumer. It doesn't matter at all for the end consumer. If someone's an Apple Podcast listener, they can still stream your podcast, and the user experience is that they're listening to it on Apple Podcasts, or they're listening to it on Amazon, or they're listening to it on Spotify. It's there in their feed for all intents and purposes. They are just listening to it on that platform. But as you correctly said, that's the distribution. Behind the scenes is what's called an RSS platform, which is actually pumping the content into those different distribution platforms. Now, you might think, well, does it really matter? Now, the actual hosting side of it and what the RSS does, they're all relatively the same. It just comes down to user experience, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's bells and whistles, isn't it?
And not a lot else other than that. But within those platforms, you do need to focus on them when you set your podcast up, because, for example, that is where you will upload your artworks, and it needs to be in the right format. It has to be exactly square so that it will work on all of the different platforms. If you want to have a widescreen image, you have to upload it into your RSS feed. If you want to have the show description, for example, we talked in a previous episode about the power of SEO, show description being one of those major places, then you need to make sure that you optimize that in the RSS feed, and then it will pull through that data to the other distribution channels. Now, again, without getting too techie and sort of drill down in the tech, because frankly, I don't understand the tech. I just utilize the platform. We've done 400 launches. We don't know the tech about it, but we understand that it works. But there's a couple of considerations when you're looking at which platform you're going to utilize. And I think the main one being, well, it's always been up until this point, usability. You know, Buzzsprout, and here's a couple of them, and we're not giving any preference to them. You've got Libsyn, Buzzsprout, Podbean, Captivate. You've got a bunch of the other ones that are independent RSS feeds. And again, they will do the same thing. They will allow you to upload your artwork, upload your audio, upload your show notes, titles, descriptions. It's also the RSS feed, and this is where you should probably shop around based on the user experience. You have to use that for every episode that you upload. So when you upload an episode, you are going to upload the audio and the artwork if you do episodic artwork, which I think you probably should be doing nowadays.
Same.
The title, the description, and all that stuff. Now, you don't have to do the setup which we'll talk about in another episode, between the RSS and Apple and Spotify every single time. Because once you do it the first time you set up the whole platform, you only have to do it the one time. But you do have to use the RSS feed for each and every episode. Yeah. So it's important to choose the one that you like best from a usability standpoint. I guess the other key consideration is picking a platform that actually helps you to hit your long-term goals. So, for example, I never thought I'd say this, but it's probably worth very much considering these days, should you be utilizing a platform that will also allow you to upload video. Now, as it stands at the time of recording in November or December when this comes out, 2024, it's only Spotify that enable you to do it. Well, actually, you can do it on Apple, but it's so bloody difficult. You have to do it natively in Apple.
And no one does it.
And nobody does it. And also the user experience. I don't actually know where the video would play in Apple Podcast. I've literally never seen it happen. Yeah. Maybe it's on the desktop version or something. I'm not sure. But at the moment, as it stands in November, December 2024, the only platform that allows you to upload the video and audio is Spotify for podcasters. Yeah. Now, I've always been a proponent of only put the video onto YouTube, because then I almost think of it in two ways. You've got the people who will consume it on audio, and then you've got the people who consume it on video. But there are those that will consume both. And I've heard recently, I was chatting to someone, they're like, I said, do you listen or watch yourself? Both. Yeah. I consume it through Spotify. So when I'm in the car, I just listen. But then if I'm at home, I will stream it and I will watch it. And I'm like, interesting. So,
and it's that whole thing of when Spotify back in, I don't know, 2020 maybe, started spending money on buying different podcast companies. They bought an existing hosting platform called Anchor. Yeah. That was free. They brought it into Spotify, sorry. They renamed it and they started spending some money on it. And it was that whole thing of Spotify is where people come to listen to music, but if they wanted to listen to a podcast, they would hop off Spotify and go to Apple to listen to a podcast. Then it was like, actually, if people are already on our platform, why don't we spend a shitload of money on getting people like Joe Rogan to host their podcast on our platform and keep them here, which is worth more money in ad revenue and all the rest of it. So the next iteration of that was them having podcasts on Spotify as well. Then they bought this hosting platform. They've reskinned it. And as you rightly said, it's now called Spotify for Podcasters. And then they went, well, actually, if people are listening to podcasts here, why don't we stop them going to YouTube and host video?
Which makes sense when you think about it.
Which makes total sense. And then you go, well, why the hell haven't Apple reacted to, because Apple never react to anything. Why haven't they done anything about this? But as it stands at the moment, as you rightly said, you've got YouTube separate, but then you've also now got Spotify for podcasters. And I made the switch, again, from Libsyn, who I think like the oldest hosting platform.
I think they were, 2004 they started. So
crazy,
like 20 years,
so I was with them for over 7 years with my podcast, Screw It, Just Do It. So I made the switch. And then I recently read an article that it might have been you shared it with me, in fact, or posted it on LinkedIn, that said 40% of podcasts on Spotify are now consumed via video.
Wow, it wasn't me that shared that because I did not know that stat.
There you go.
Wow,
that seems massive. That seems massive to me. But
they appeal to Spotify is generally skews as a younger user base, and they are used to watching video as well. And also for a lot of like with music, I play Spotify music all the time in the office.
Like your drill music.
But by DVR, I just love a bit of drill. For nothing like a bit of drill for concentrating on podcasts, I find. But then if it's playing in the background, it's by default it's playing the video at the same time.
Yeah.
So actually, you're probably accruing a whole bunch of new views that have not actually potentially really viewed it because it's just playing in the background of something. But, when I drive to work every day and I see...
Go on, does he complain about the traffic?
Oh, don't I just... But when I sit in the traffic, you would be amazed the amount of people who are driving their car, who are watching bloody Spotify and watching music videos while we're sat in the traffic.
Yeah.
And I'm like, interesting. So I can see why it's moving in that direction. My whole take on it has been with the audio versus video thing is that at the moment you can't see the number of views in a public format for Spotify.
Good point. No, you can't. Whereas YouTube, it's right
Whereas
there.
with YouTube, it's right there. So from a credit, and again, not that the views is the be all and end all, because you might have 10 people who watch it, but if they become 10 of your clients, then it's been a good result. But ultimately, rightly or wrongly, a lot of people put credence and credibility on the amount of numbers that you've got. So whether that be subscriber numbers, whether that be view numbers, or whatever it may be, you can obviously you can switch off on YouTube as well, but the majority of people don't switch off.
Yeah.
A few months ago at the time of recording, when Donald Trump had gone on to Joe Rogan, and he got 45 million views within 48 hours. That was very easily viewable, and there's a lot of narrative around, look how much attention this podcast has got in a short time span. Now, I think the same thing applies to personal brand website podcasts and business podcasts as well. So my whole thing of, I get the idea of being on other platforms, because why would you not want to make people be able to consume that content?
Yeah.
But my reticence, I guess, at the moment is that if people would want to consume the video, but they could only go to YouTube, am I losing those YouTube views, which obviously you can monetize in a way that you can't with Spotify?
Which is what I was just about to say. Then it's an easy one to go to, and this is obviously isn't the route for everyone, but you've got the sponsor angle, but then you've also got the YouTube AdSense, where you're getting 50% of the ad revenue that YouTube's getting by sticking those ads in front of your videos.
Yes.
So,
which might not be the thing for
point.
you anyway, to be fair. You might not want... So, for example, we get lots of clients who do, us as an agency and you guys as an agency probably appeal to the same market. They are experts, consultants, people who are in the B2B space, or people who are building a brand, either a business brand or a personal brand. Do you really want your competitor to be able to go, oh, do you know what? They've already got all this attention. I'll put the eyeballs that they've got on my competitive offering ahead of the video.
Yeah.
It's a big call that you've got to make, ultimately. But again, just from maybe we're going a little bit off topic here, but from a podcast hosting...
Reel it back in.
But from a podcast hosting perspective, I mean, it's getting harder and harder to see the lack of appeal for Spotify for podcasters, frankly. It's a good user experience. You can do audio and video at the same time.
Yeah.
It's now got comments in Spotify as well. So that's the place where you can engage with your listeners' comments.
Yeah.
Again, Apple's never done it. Spotify are absolutely taking their lunch. But yeah, for me, I'm still 50-50 on whether you should have, and at the time of recording, we still have audio in one platform and video solely on YouTube. I mean, the fact there's never been a YouTube competitor is crazy when you think about it.
It is.
Oh, you've got Vimeo, but Vimeo is not really the same user experience.
No.
But yeah, that's how I'm doing it. So I would still be looking at podcast hosting platforms right now at the time of recording. I'm looking at it like, where's the best user experience? We've recently just moved a load of our shows over to Captivate because it's a great user experience. We can let our clients access individual shows, you can give them individual sort of rights. You can make them an admin or just a viewer of stats and stuff. That's really good. So I'm using a platform, an RSS feed, just to do the audio at the moment, and I'm just using YouTube for the video. But
and also cost will, just to kind of wrap it up, cost will come into it for a lot of independent creators. And if you're spending $25, $30, because they're usually done in dollars, a month, then that's potentially £300-400 a year that you're spending for that. Whereas Spotify, who have a ridiculous percentage of the hosting market, are offering it for free.
Also, Spotify bought Megaphone, didn't they?
They did.
And Megaphone, and they bought Chartable.
And then got rid of Chartable.
And they got rid of Chartable. So now Chartable, which at the time of recording is probably will be gone by the time this podcast episode comes out to the public. So Chartable is a really good, almost like aggregator of stats, and it attributed chart positions and where you were featured around the world. It's really good from a credibility standpoint. So, for example, you can go and go, oh, I'm in the top 10 in Ghana's entrepreneurship category. Whether that gives you any value or not, who knows? But
in Ghana, I was huge.
Were you really?
Yeah.
I always knew it.
All of the African countries, actually, for Screw It, Just Do It.
Really?
Yeah, literally all of them. Uganda, Ghana,
I suppose they're a very positive
Kenya.
mindset.
I've been number one in all of them.
Really?
Yeah. Entrepreneurship.
So if you went there and got out of the airport, would you be like...
Red carpet.
It would be,
Red carpet.
Fine.
Entourage.
Sure.
Hotel.
Sure.
Yeah. Maybe a band playing. Next to the private jet. Maybe.
We have lost him to his ego, people.
A meeting with the president.
Right. Okay. Let's reel it back in.
Press and flesh.
Let's reel it back in, shall we? So when you are choosing your podcast hosting platform, in summary, you got to base it on the long-term goals that you've had, but equally, nowadays, whilst we said at the beginning, all RSS platforms.
What kind of a phrase is nowadays?
What do you mean?
Nowadays.
Well, it's now, isn't it?
It's like Victorian.
Nowadays, you have got to choose the RSS platform. Spotify for Podcasters does a really good job, and it's free. Kind of makes it a bit of a no-brainer. I wonder if in the back end of the algorithm, though, there's other platforms know that you're hosted on Spotify and therefore squash the reach. Maybe not. Whether they're allowed to, who knows? Then you've got
conspiracy theorist as well. I'm just going to add that to my list.
Victorian conspiracy theorist. That's what I'm going to go as in my next fancy dress costume outfit night out.
Could make a podcast about Victorian conspiracy theories. That's niche of niche.
That is a good. I would actually quite like that.
Right, moving on. Let's wrap this one up.
But yeah, and then also having a look, go and have a look at all these platforms. Again, if you're new to the
do your research.
They are relatively the same cost. Spotify for Podcasters is free. It is fairly user friendly. If you want detailed stats, like you want Chartable, then maybe you have to go to Megaphone because then that's the only place that you can get it. Again, they're all about they're 10 to 25, $30.
And they'll all give you some form of data around your podcast is what we should tell people. Some of them have got monetization programs in there, but again, for the independent creator who's starting out with your average, I don't know, what's the average?
Sub 1,000 downloads a month.
Yeah, exactly. Then realistically, are they something that you're going to do when you're literally getting $15 to $30 per 1,000 download? That ain't going to bring in a lot of money. So for me, that doesn't really push you over the edge into going to any of those specific hosting platforms.
All of them will have pros and cons. Go and check them out. And a lot of them will give you a free trial.
Yep.
But I would say with the free trial thing, don't go too far down the line because obviously as soon as you start setting up the feed, the RSS feed, and then you link it through to Apple or Spotify, which we talk about in Pod School a lot, as soon as you've done that, then that is where your show is hosted. And then it's a bit of a pain in the bum to move it to a different provider. You can do it. You can move RSS feeds, but it is a pain in the bum.
It just time suck. Yeah, we've done it, but it's a time suck.
Absolutely. So key considerations. What do you want? The analytics, ease of use, or the pricing? What is most important to you? There's loads of them about. Again, if you want to, we'll put some links in the show notes. So there is Libsyn,
Acast.
Acast. We didn't even mention Acast. Oh, Freudian slip. Acast, Spotify for Podcasters, Buzzsprout, Podbean. Go and have a look and just test them out, have a little look around and dig around in the inside. They will, but make sure whichever platform you go to, when you set it up, take a bit of time setting it up that first time because it's very important. Show descriptions, artwork, putting yourself in the right categories, putting yourself in the right subcategories. It's another thing that we talk a lot about in Pod School to make sure that you get the optimization when you set up the RSS feed. There's a whole section of training on that.
Keywords, tags, and again, it just takes time. And I mean, we probably like you offer it as a service for the agency. That is what we do with every single client. We literally spend that time setting up the hosting, setting up, syncing all the distribution channels, etc., etc. So it's just another thing that you have to do and you need to spend time on, but you want to build this on solid foundations. So put the time in, get it done. And
absolutely.
Do your research and make a decision and just get started. That's the hardest thing with all of this. Just get started.
Well, we've got a little bit techie and a little bit geeky today, but hopefully it's given you
a little bit Victorian.
And a little bit Victorian conspiracy.
And a little bit conspiracy.
But join us again on the next episode. If you've got value from this conversation, please feel free. Leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your downloads of your podcast. Honestly, I know people will say that all the time on podcasts. Please leave us a review, but it actually really helps. The algorithm favours it, and it's really good for other people to discover you and to know that the content is really good. And also, if you want to dive into more detail on this subject, we talk about RSS, setting up platforms, how to make sure that your show is optimized on every single platform around the world. It's all in Pod School. You can click the link in the show notes right now. It is completely free to join. It is the #1 community of podcast makers on the planet. Oh, that's what we're turning it into, aren't we?
It is already.
It is already in our mind's eye. Conspiracy theories and manifestation. I mean, why would you not want to come back for the next episode? See you then. Ta-da.
Bye.